Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. We're going to have now a presentation from Dale Knauss from Presence. He's going to talk about VR, AR, some of his past experience, some of the challenges. Give him a round of applause. Dale, have it go.
All right. Cool. Hey, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out. Before I get started, I just want to say a big thank you to the organizers of SINFO. They've been working all year and have done a really awesome job. I'm told it's the largest free tech conference in Portugal, so that's awesome. So quick round of applause for them. Cool. All right, so welcome to my talk on building the future of non-gaming virtual and augmented reality. Quick background on myself and what I do. I'm the head of XR for a company called Presence. We're in San Francisco, and we build digital products. On one side, we do stuff like Salesforce and web backends and beautiful UIs and stuff like that. And then my group in particular focuses on building virtual and augmented reality experiences. Over the past few years, we've done pretty cool projects for companies like the Discovery Channel, Intuit, and a project I'll talk about in a little bit called Mira with a startup that allows people to create virtual and augmented reality experiences in the browser. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So let me go on. I'll talk a bit about what we're going to cover today, but before I do that, can I just get a quick show of hands? How many people have played with virtual or augmented reality before? Cool. And has anyone built anything for VR, AR before? All right, well, hopefully, I know there's a bunch of CS majors in this room. Hopefully, I can inspire some people in here by the end of this talk to give it a go. So what we're going to be covering today, first, I'm going to be giving you an overview of VR and AR, specifically for non-gaming. So I say non-gaming because I think when people immediately think of VR, gaming is the first thing that comes to mind. And gaming's awesome. If you looked at my Steam account, I have so many hours and so many VR games, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit it. But the potential for both VR and AR is far beyond gaming. And I want to cover some of the use cases that we've been seeing and exploring today, and hopefully kind of stoke some ideas on some of the stuff we're going to see in the future. VR is still just at its beginning. AR is still just at its beginning, and we're still discovering what works and what doesn't. And I think one of the big challenges is just understanding its capabilities and understanding what you can do with it. So we're going to go into that a little bit. I'm also going to be sharing some of the lessons that we've learned building experiences for people. One of the really cool things about this space is nobody knows what's right yet. There's no best practices. It's not like building a website where roughly you know you have to build a footer and a header and navigation and a contact page. No, it's a brand new thing, and we're always learning new things. And if you discover something cool, you could share it, and people will adapt it because we're defining the best practices as we go. And we'll also go a little bit, just briefly at the end, into how you can get started. So hopefully by the end, a few of you will want to know, and we'll go through that. All right, so let's talk first about virtual reality. I just put up a few headsets here. Obviously, there's many more. I know there's a Gear VR and a PSVR out there. Both are really cool. I'm mostly going to focus in this talk on what I'd call high-end desktop VR. A few reasons for that. First of all, they're closest to where we're going. Mobile AR, by necessity today, has a lot of more constraints than desktop VR, just because of smaller, less powerful GPUs and CPUs, and just more constraints. So I want to talk more about these, because this is where we're starting to see the latest technologies flow into things like the HTC Vive, the Oculus Rift, and some of the mixed reality stuff. I will say this year is going to be a pretty big year for VR, particularly because some totally untethered mobile headsets that don't require a phone are coming out from Oculus, as well as maybe from Vive, and a few other providers that are going to make a big difference. These, for a few $100s or a few €100, you're going to be able to get a pretty good VR experience. So let's talk about what makes virtual reality valuable. Obviously, it's a lot of fun. Obviously, it's just really cool. But what we're interested in is what is going to make it something that will actually become as important to us as our mobile phone or as our computer. I believe it will get there, and I think I'm going to share some of the reasons why. But Oops, sorry. Here's a few things that just kind of came to mind when I was thinking about this. First of all, it lets us go anywhere and do anything. So by that I mean we're not constrained by our physical selves anymore. We don't have to travel anywhere. Everything is suddenly opened up to us. We can be on the moon. We can be deep in the ocean. We could be in any city, any place, anything we want, controlled only by what some team has created for us. That's pretty powerful because it really unlocks all sorts of interesting new opportunities. It lets us see things in new ways. So we're able to do, we're able to do things that aren't possible before. It lets us shrink down to the size of an atom. It lets us explore the insides of a vehicle without having to take it apart. It lets us go inside the shoes of an athlete and experience what that's like. We can dissect and do anything we want in VR. It also eliminates location and social barriers. I'll be talking about a few social VR experiences that I think are going to be really important in just a little bit. But this is actually proving to be one of the early, really key use cases, particularly for consumers, is unlike Skype or something like that, you're able to have a true conversation with people and feel like they're actually in the room with you. So before long, I'm sure plenty of you have worked with remote teams before. Before long, those meetings are going to be happening in VR. Because unlike Skype, where it can feel very disconnected and you're talking through a screen, we're getting to the point where VR, with the help of some facial tracking technology, is actually going to allow us to communicate with someone almost as well as if they were in the room with us. And at that point, why do we need office space? Why do we need to actually be there with someone if we're able to recreate the environment and feel as though it's really there? Another big one, unlimited space. So it turns out that, particularly if you're working on a computer, but even in your real life, we're constantly constrained by space. If I'm working on my computer, I have a little tiny screen here, maybe I hook it up to a monitor, but ultimately I'm kind of focused right here. When you don't have physics and you don't have the cost of monitors, all of a sudden I could have a display over here, a display over here, one over here, and I'm able to really make more use of my physical environment, and I'm able to store stuff in ways that make sense to me. And I'm really able to find entirely new ways to work. And then finally, it lets us break the rules. So no more pesky things like physics. That's out the window. Time. I could pause time. Space. It doesn't matter. You can essentially, what VR is letting us do is break all the rules and reimagine what it's like to work and do whatever we want without the typical constraints that we as humans have had, which I think we'll go over some cool use cases of that in a little bit. So most importantly, and these are the terms that we'll return to over and over again as to why VR is particularly valuable, is it allows us to immerse people and create a sense of presence as though you are really in an environment, as though you are really experiencing what the developer wants you to experience. So it turns out this is really, really useful for a lot of reasons. When VR is done right, you forget that you're a person standing in a room with a headset on, and you actually experience the feeling of being in another place and doing another thing. Most of our time when we're designing experiences, depending on the experience, of course, is focused on how do we make sure people feel fully immersed and present in the experience? How do we not break that feeling that we're truly in that place doing that thing? I'll talk a lot about that throughout the presentation. So at the high end, current VR technology allows us the stereoscopic 3D display. It's what fools our eyes into thinking that we're seeing depth out on ultimately a flat screen. It offers us, we have 6 degrees of freedom room scale tracking. So if I'm walking around a space, I'm able to actually walk around my 3D environment. This is only high-end VR. This doesn't have it yet. Spatial audio. So I won't cover that too much, but we'll talk a little bit more about engaging senses in VR soon. But spatial audio is important because it allows us to actually experience audio as though we do in the real world. For instance, when you're listening to music, you're just having one source from everything. With spatial audio, if I want to say right here at stage there's a sound, and I want to actually have it behave as though there was a sound here and it was bouncing around the room and ultimately hitting my ear here at a certain time and here at a certain time. The audio algorithms are actually able to replicate that as though it was really happening. And it turns out audio is a big part of how we experience our surroundings, of course. So when you actually have that feeling of real audio, it helps with that immersion. And finally, track controllers with haptic feedback. So another important sense is the sense of touch. Haptic feedback is currently what we have in at least commercial VR, where it's essentially small vibrations. If you've used like a PlayStation, you get that little bit of rumble. There's a lot of cool things coming out with haptic feedback soon, where they're actually able to more elegantly simulate all sorts of things that you're touching. There's also smell and taste experiments out there. So ultimately, what we're aiming for is to fully simulate all of our senses to, again, continue to increase that immersion. So let's jump into the use cases of non-gaming virtual reality. I've assembled a bunch here. This is like a tiny fraction of what I could have assembled, but we only have so much time. So let's just go through a few of these. I want you to think about this as we're going through it. I'm covering a few, and I'm going to try to lay out why they're valuable. But I think one of the things that I'm always encouraging people to do is try to associate that with your own hobbies or your own projects or your own things, and you could really actually hopefully come up with tomorrow's great use cases for VR. I know I'm always coming up with ideas like, why has no one built that yet? So the first one I want to talk about is training. This is kind of probably one of the most obvious use cases to a lot of people. It's taken off the quickest, or at least outside of gaming, probably the quickest. And it lets us do a lot of cool things. Making VR training experiences is something a lot of companies are investing in because it allows them to increase information retention and learning. So whereas if you're just consuming information, if you're an audio learner or a visual learner, you're getting that. But as we all know, experiential learning, actually being there and doing the thing that you want to do, is probably, for most people, going to be the best way to learn it. And VR lets us do that. Another kind of cool thing is right now, because VR is such an interesting technology, people are excited to engage with VR. So unlike typical training where nobody really wants to go to a training unless it's something you're particularly passionate about, it actually can get people excited about VR. Again, it lets us recreate rare or expensive scenarios. Before I talked about lets us go anywhere, do anything, there's a lot of training scenarios that you just can't replicate. They maybe happen once a year, or maybe they don't happen for years at a time, and you need a way to get people ready for those experiences. Likewise, expensive things. One of the examples we'll talk about, I'll talk about it now, is medical companies and hardware manufacturers have these big, heavy, hundreds of thousands of dollar pieces of equipment that they need to train people on. But of course, if you have to train hundreds of people on equipment that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, that's an expensive endeavor. So what they're finding is actually by training people in VR, recreating these pieces of equipment and allowing them to learn without having to work on their real equipment is a huge, huge benefit to their ability to quickly train people in all sorts of events. And finally, because it's all hooked up and we're able to grab all the data, unlike traditional trainings, we're able to get a lot more data about what people are doing and use that data to influence the experience. I know there's been a lot of work done even up till now using AI to actually tailor the training experience in real time based off of what people are struggling with or needing to learn. So these are just some of the companies. Hopefully you recognize a few. I wasn't sure which are out here or which weren't. But these are some major companies in the United States that are heavily invested in training. I love to give the Walmart example. Walmart is, of course, the biggest retailer, I believe, in the United States. They have 200 training facilities, and I believe either by the end of last year or the end of this year, every single one of them is going to have VR training as part of their curriculum. That's over 130,000 people using VR to train. This is a great one when I mentioned simulate rare events. We have something called Black Friday in America. It happens right after a holiday, Thanksgiving, and it's crazy. Americans lose their mind for this. Every company has a big sale. People stampede on each other to buy a TV for 20% off. It's It's ridiculous. And Walmart needs to train people around that. So what they've done is they've made specifically a Black Friday training event and let people actually experience what it's like to deal with this pandemonium, this madness that's happening then, without having to have them actually wait for it. So now they're able to actually get people ready before doing that. John Deere, they're a big tractor manufacturer. I talked about the expensive equipment, so they're using it to train people on that. UPS is one of the biggest shippers in the US. They're equipping a lot of their warehouse training facilities with both VR and I believe AR. And the NFL which National Football League many teams have adopted VR as a way of actually training their athletes to actually prepare for games using VR, to actually prepare them for real situations. So the next area we should talk about is sales. Pretty much every industry has a sales process of some sort. Sales is a little bit earlier on, I'd say, than training as far as real commercial adaptations of it, but it's already seeing some pretty cool traction. So VR allows us to emotionally engage with prospects. It lets us tell a story and have people actually experience that in a much deeper way than you could just with a video or with a written word. So what we're finding is we can make a VR experience that tells the story of our company or our product in a way that we never were before. It also lets us show physical objects before we build them. This is important in things like architecture and in all sorts of other. In real estate is another one. If you're going to be, I guess architecture and real estate, and some heavy equipment. I know. Well, we'll go over some examples. There's also, you have infinite inventory and customization, which leads right into this example from Audi. So very soon in over 400 Audi showrooms, they've equipped with an Oculus Rift and a pretty cool experience that lets their potential customers try any one of their hundreds of colors and trimmings and different experiences in VR, actually drive around in that car that they've created in VR and really feel what it's like before they actually do a test drive. This lets them show off all their configuration without having to maintain a huge inventory of products, without having to do any of the things that they've typically had to do to show off such a big selection. A few other cool examples. Matterport. This is a company that's really taken the real estate world by storm. What they do is a process called photogrammetry, where they'll go into a house that's for sale or something else that's for sale. They'll take a bunch of pictures and using some fancy software will stitch together a 3D representation of those pictures into something that looks like this, which is essentially a dollhouse, but it's an actual representation of this house in 3D that you're able to walk through either on the web or in VR. So they've really crushed it in terms of allowing real estate agents to easily show off all of their properties prior to actually taking their clients around to different properties. Another one, and I put this here, and maybe it deserves its own slide, but nonprofits, social impact groups have found a major benefit in VR. So this company, Charity Water, produced a 360-degree video that told a story about their cause that they used at one of their galas, and they saw, I want to say it was a 200%, some ridiculous increase in the donations earned at those events by telling the story in this engaging 3D way as opposed to their traditional movie type of thing. So a lot of other charities and nonprofits have picked up this idea of VR actually is able to create empathy and make us really care about the cause that they're supporting in a way that we were never able to before. So collaboration and productivity. These are actually a lot of those other ones you can't actually find anywhere online. These two experiences, I believe the Spotify one is publicly available. If not, it should be. Big screen is definitely probably one of my favorite VR experiences, and it points to a pretty interesting future where we're collaborating with each other, interacting with each other inside of VR. Essentially how it works is it mirrors your screen inside of the experience. So you're able to control your screen just like you would sitting down. You could then invite other people in to participate and also see your screen. You have avatars, as you can see by these little guys here. And you're able to do whatever you'd normally do outside of VR. I've actually spent some hours working in big screen because I could just pull up my code editor and actually code in here. Unfortunately, they don't have tracked keyboards yet, so it's a little bit tricky. You have to really be good at touch typing. But it points to a future where we're able to collaborate with people all over the world within VR. Expo is by a company called Spotify that does e-commerce. They wanted a way to be able to deal with their remote team and prototype cool new ideas quickly and share those prototypes with the other people on the team. They created this VR experience that, again, you have avatars that are representations of them. You can draw in 3D space. You can craft digital products, and then you can share them out with people. There's a whole host of different features they've created for that, but I think it's a great example of what we can expect around collaboration online. Again, they're making use of unlimited space, no constraints, and that ability to work remotely and collaborate as though you're in the same room. Data visualization. This is a big topic. I listed Google Earth VR, and some people will say that's not data visualization, but it's actually, I said big screen is one of my favorite VR experiences. If you get a chance, Google Earth VR is my favorite VR experience. Highly encourage everyone to check it out. You could go anywhere in the world and see a 3D representation of your house, of your school, of anywhere you want. I love demoing this for people because the first thing they do is they always go and find their house. They go down to it, and I get to know where everyone lives. But essentially, using the same thing as I talked about before with photogrammetry, they've created a 3D mesh of essentially the entire world. There's some blocked out areas and stuff that you could then go down to almost street level and see and actually be in that space. The reason I say it's data visualization is, well, first of all, it's a bunch of data. It's all geographical data. But also you can imagine the applications on top of something like Google Earth. For instance, if you wanted to build a new restaurant, maybe you want to go see the places that you're interested in building in to get a feel for what they look like. Instead of having to drive for them, you can go and actually just experience them without leaving your house. This one is Virtualytics, is a company that's been doing some really cool stuff in 3D data visualization in VR. There's just a few of the examples of graphs here, but they're doing a lot more than that. They're one of a bunch of people who are trying to solve this problem of, we have all this really complex three-dimensional data that we haven't really been good at visualizing before. How do we show it in a way that you can actually provide valuable insights to people? So this is one of their early approaches to doing that. They're doing a lot of cool stuff. But this idea of being able to represent 3D data, interact with it in a virtual world, and gain insights from it is going to continually become more valuable. I mentioned this earlier. This is a product that my company was engaged to work on. I'm actually the interim CTO of Mira. Now, the reason I bring it up here is it lets people build VR and AR experiences. And the cool thing about that is we've gotten a chance to see what some of the really pioneering stuff that people have been working on so far. So all those things I mentioned before, sales, presentations, we've seen school presentations on there. We worked with a museum to show off some of their display technology. Magazines that want to show off the interiors of spaces. All sorts of really interesting use cases, and people continually surprise us with new stuff that they're finding they can tell the story of, or they can communicate ideas in new ways through VR and AR. So it's pretty cool stuff. But there are some limitations. So part of building anything for VR or AR right now is understanding the limitations, because there are a lot of them. We're getting better every year, but there's still a lot there to struggle with, to understand, so you can actually craft an experience that works today and prepare for experiences that are going to work in the future. So on the hardware side, devices are still too bulky and uncomfortable. They're getting better, but having to strap this big heavy thing on your face isn't ideal if you want to use it for 8 hours a day, which I hope to be able to someday do. It's too expensive. Having a desktop VR Used to be a few $1,000s, it's getting cheaper, but it's still too expensive for most people. The resolution isn't the best. Because it's having to display in two different eyes slightly differently, and because of our current display technology, we're just not there yet in terms of having the type of resolution we've gotten used to on flat displays. And there's a lot of friction to setting everything up. There's also still lots of wires to manage. You have to deal with the trackers and all sorts of different stuff there. On the software side, experiences need to run at 90 frames per second, at least for desktop VR. On mobile VR, it's 60. But this is a big deal. It's hard to get to 90 frames per second, particularly if you're trying to do something fairly intensive. So you're going to spend a lot of time optimizing. And of course, that means you're going to be limited in exactly what you can do because you have to hit that so you don't make your people sick. Creating good content can be hard and expensive. That's a big problem right now. We'll talk about it in a second. It's getting easier. But right now, you need a pretty big team of people to really create a full, really strong experience. It's not the web where one talented developer can actually do a lot. Computers aren't fast enough yet. We need faster GPUs and CPUs in order to power the experiences of the future. And we have to keep users from getting sick. We've gotten a lot better at this, but there's still challenges to be had there. So that's something that we're always dealing with. The good news is major money and brain power are being applied. There's all the world's biggest, many of giant companies are investing massive amounts of resources in solving these problems right now. Unity and Unreal are empowering small teams. We'll talk about that in the Getting Started section, but these are two game engines, which are now becoming more universal 3D VR AR engines that are allowing what used to take a large team of people to be an experience that used to be able to be created by a large team to be able to create by a much smaller team. There's all sorts of tools built in that make it much faster to actually develop something. They still have a ways to go, but they're pretty amazing what they can do. The next generation of headsets have major improvements. We're going to get wireless desktop VR. It's actually being rolled out now. So if you've ever experienced an Oculus or a Vive and got tangled around in cords like I have, that's a big exciting thing that's coming. Resolution's getting better. There's a headset now that's claiming 8K. It has limitations, and the computers really can't keep up with that so much yet, but it's coming. And GPUs just keep getting better. So, like I said, cordless VR, resolution improvements, pricing. It used to be it cost at least $2,000 to have an Oculus or a Vive. Now with lower specs required for desktop VR and headsets coming down in price, you could do it for under $1,000, which is, I don't know, $1,200. I don't know the current conversion, but not that much. And there's new libraries and abstractions that are coming all the time that are making it easier than ever to actually develop an experience. All right, so let's talk about augmented reality. When I'm talking about augmented reality, we have two types of augmented reality right now. We have the type that's on our phone, ARKit and AR Core, that everyone now has access to. And then we have head AR, like the HoloLens, Daiquiri, ODG, and Meta. So I'm going to share a few mobile AR experiences, but this talk, again, is about building the future. And the future is head-mounted AR experiences. Why? Because nobody wants to stand around doing this for a long portion of time. Also, they're built with a lot more customized equipment focused just on making AR great. If you haven't tried any, I particularly recommend the HoloLens. Is just an amazing piece of equipment that you can actually get access to. All of them are actually pretty cool, and they share most of the functionality. So let's talk about really quickly, on the mobile AR side, we'll talk about that as well. Yeah, I'll go into that in a minute. So what makes augmented reality valuable? So augmented reality understands and enhances our existing world. By that I mean, with good augmented reality technology, when I'm looking around, it's creating a representation of my world that then I can then, as a developer, interact with. So at the low end, if I have my phone AR, right now ARKit understands what a floor is, it understands what a wall is as of the most recent update, and that's about it. With better AR, you're able to actually start to understand specific objects in the room. So for instance, in the HoloLens, in the HoloLens, you're able to understand a chair and a table and place things accordingly. So you're actually able to tailor your experiences to the current user's current environment. And that turns out to be really valuable in a lot of situations. There's also a lot being done around computer vision that lets us understand actual objects and images and then pull information from the cloud relevant to those images or objects. So for instance, and eventually even people, by the way, which is kind of creepy, but at some point I'll be able to look around this room, it'll be scanning your faces and give me back information in a little heads-up display on every one of you, which is incredibly creepy, but it's coming sooner than I think any of us would like. But even now, I'm able to pretty easily set up something like the HoloLens or even my phone to scan objects and images in a room and give me back information about that particular set of objects. It's also a front end to a lot of other powerful technologies. So whereas VR I feel is more contained, with AR, I really consider it another front end. I consider it something like just the website where there's all these crazy server side processes running, and the AR is actually just about displaying information in powerful ways. So whether that's AI, whether that's computer vision, whether that's various interesting, all sorts of interesting things, it's actually going to enable us to tell stories and to show off some really cool stuff that's happening behind the scenes. So again, the idea of unlimited displays wherever you want them. One of these companies that I had mentioned when I showed the AR headsets, Meta, is trying to move to a point where we no longer have monitors. So their idea is, what if you just wore a headset all the time and your monitors were just digitally displayed wherever you wanted them? You can already do that. It's not quite good enough yet, I'd say, to use on a day-to-day basis. It's not quite comfortable enough, but we're really close. And at that point, there's really no point for a monitor when I could blow up, and there's really no point for this thing when I could just have a digital screen that's just as large with any time I wanted to. And it lets us capture data during real-world tasks. So this is especially important in enterprise where your workers are constantly working, and we want to have a stream of data of what they're doing as they do it. So what does current high-end AR technology offer us? It builds a 3D point cloud of your location. So that's what I talked about earlier, where it's actually building in data representation of what it's seeing in real time. Ultimately, this will enable all sorts of really amazing things. There's talk about an AR cloud, which is essentially this idea that every part of the world is mapped as a 3D point cloud up on a server, so we're able to have a shared 3D representation of the world, which is really exciting. Again, I talked about using computer vision to identify images and objects. Again, another really big thing is obviously being able to render 3D objects and displays that feel real. So what this is about is using technology called SLAM, and understanding the room, we're able to place 3D objects and have them stay where they place them and feel like they're actually part of our environment. Whereas before, if you put if you tried to render a 3D object on your phone, it would just follow the camera. You wouldn't be able to say, I want to place it on the floor and have it always stay right there on the floor. Now we're able to do that. And we're able to actually render 3D objects in the real world and make them feel like they're really there for you in the real world. And finally, this is kind of a gateway to other technologies, but the cool AR is also exploring brand new ways to deal with input, or ways that we haven't had to deal with before, because all of a sudden you don't always have a keyboard and mouse to deal with. So these technologies are empowering the next generation of voice, gesture, and touch recognition. So rather than having to type and click where I want to do, I can say, hey, go to the next screen, or do a gesture. The most annoying gesture in HoloLens is this. Nobody likes it, but essentially this is, instead of mouse click, you do this. And this is for opening up the menu. And they're just keep exploring those. And then touch recognition, some of the headsets, not HoloLens, you're actually able to physically interact with what you're doing. When the actual 3D representation, you can touch it and it responds as you actually would touch it. So let's talk about some use cases. This is a big one we're seeing right now, guided work. So what that means is, this is particularly relevant in manufacturing, but we're seeing a handful of other places also. What that means is overlaying a display of what people are supposed to be doing as they're doing it and providing contextual information that lets them do it better. Oh, is my mic cutting out? Back in business? Cool. So some interesting stats about that. Overall, we're seeing about a 25% time savings in manufacturing using guided work versus non-guided work. A really cool example of this, a shipbuilder for the Navy used a superimposed image of the ship they were building on top of the physical ship, and they were able to achieve a 96% reduction in the inspection time for confirming that that ship was built up to spec just by using this AR overlay. Another cool one, Boeing was still in prototype phase, but was able to assemble the parts that they were trying to using a guided work procedure 35% less time than not using it. And people were able to actually achieve that on their first time 90% faster than they were previously able to. Data display and visualization. Again, so much of the work we do today is based around displaying and visualizing data and information. So I just picked a few examples here. Hundreds of them online, but Porsche is allowing people to actually view various parts of their car or vehicle in 3D and take it apart and actually understand what various parts of it do, which is kind of cool. And the other one here, the human brain from Meta, is really mind-blowing when you see it live. I don't think this does it justice, but this is actually showing real data from someone's brain being represented in 3D here. So you're seeing the yellow is various activity happening in the brain with various data overlays that you can then, I believe, in some ways interact with as you're in there. There's all sorts of other examples, but data visualization is proving to be one of the really big things everybody wants to do in AR. This one's another really powerful use case that we're seeing a lot, and that's this idea of remote experts. And actually on the right, if you guys ever have a parent or grandparent that's constantly asking you for technical help, I strongly recommend this Vuforia chalk. Essentially, I think it works, I know it works on the iOS, I believe it works on Android too, but it lets you connect with someone else, get a display of their screen, and actually draw on their screen and have it stick to those parts in AR. So what this empowers is letting people do technical support over the phone and actually see what they're seeing and actually give them information that they're able to use to do whatever they're trying to do. This other example is from a company whose name I could never manage to pronounce, but they're one of the largest elevator companies in the world. They sell and repair elevators. They've heavily embraced the HoloLens to allow them to, the big stat is they've been able to reduce the average length of service calls by 4x, meaning that where before it was taking hours, it's now taking, well, probably measured in minutes instead of hours to accomplish a lot of these things. So what happens is they're able to have one technician go out into the field and then have the real experts for any given type of elevator somewhere else, and rather than having to send that particular expert to that particular place, anyone is able to do what previously took a specific expert. There was also a great article, BP, British Petroleum, was able to use a similar tech to this to reduce their service calls from 9 hours to a matter of minutes by doing the same thing. All of their experts are sitting in a warehouse somewhere, and their on-the-field technicians are able to go out and be guided through any one of the processes to deal with problems at their refineries. E-commerce. So this is one where I'd say mobile AR has a little bit of an advantage just because you can pull it out and use it today. I think IKEA Place is probably the best implementation of AR, mobile AR I've seen so far. Amazon AR does a similar thing, but essentially allows you to bring out furniture from their catalog and place it in your room before you go out and buy it. So this is going to be a trend that's going to continue as the technology gets better, but pretty much most people want to try things before they buy them. And this allows you to place objects all around the room and essentially decorate your whole room without ever having to go to the store. And you get, it's actually a pretty impressive representation. It really seems like it's there. So we're going to continue to see this type of technology evolve. One exciting use case of it is, not that anyone uses Microsoft Edge, aka Internet Explorer, but if you do, they're talking about, sorry Microsoft, if you do, they're talking about making that native to the web. So if you're an e-commerce company and you have 3D representations of your products, you can natively in HTML say, here's the 3D representation, and anyone just on their native browser who has AR capabilities can pull it out and place it in their world. So this is going to become a part of the web in addition to just app-based, and it's going to be a big differentiator for the companies that actually understand 3D and AR. I'm going to go into some limitations of AR, but before I do, there's a slide I forgot, which I think is super cool and super exciting for both VR and AR, and that's art and music. So a lot of these were kind of practical technologies, but seeing some of the stuff that is happening in art and music in 3D space in VR and AR is super exciting. If you guys want, probably my favorite artist is a guy out of not too far from where I am. He's in the East Bay in California. He's named Kabibo, and he's doing amazing stuff that rivals anything you see in an art gallery in 3D, and particularly in VR and AR. I believe that this is a field that will actually continue to grow and hopefully be embraced by art galleries and museums all over soon enough. Kabibo, C-A-B-B-I-B-O or something like that. He's incredible. And there's tons of other great digital artists that are doing amazing stuff. I should have really put a slide on there, but maybe I'll post something on Twitter afterwards with some of my favorites. All right, but there are some limitations to AR too. Mobile AR is limited due to its form factor. Like I said, we expect there's going to be some cool innovation in mobile AR, but we really expect the AR to take off as soon as everyone can be equipped with a headset and hopefully glasses, just by virtue of its form factor and its power to render stuff. Computer vision, it's good, but it's not great. So there's a lot of work to go there to continue with object and image and person recognition that will power the future of AR. Location and contextual accuracy is challenging. So we get the request a lot where people want to say, okay, I want to place something right where that SINFO sign is, and I want my friend to be able to come over and see the same thing. Well, unfortunately, unless you have a full 3D point cloud like the HoloLens is doing, you can't do that, because it turns out we still have to use what we already have, which is GPS. And if you've ever tried to order an Uber, you know their GPS can be a little bit inaccurate. So we're not quite there yet. There's a lot of cool stuff coming out that will let us have a persistent world that we can share with other people, but we're getting there. Scanning requires good conditions and targets. In bad lighting, you can really struggle with that. And of course, good headsets are expensive. I talked a lot about the HoloLens. Costs $3,000 right now. So we need the price of that to come down a lot. All right, let me check time. All right, okay, I've gone way over. So let's quickly scan through this. So what we've learned, avoid the novelty trap. So a lot of people build AR and VR because it's cool. Don't do that. I mean, do it if you want to just have fun, but if you're trying to build something real, ask yourself, what are the real benefits, what are the real values that VR, AR is providing outside of traditional technologies? Think outside of the screen. By that I mean, we're used to, if you've done web development or web design, you're used to thinking in this very narrow, confined space. Well, we can't do that in 3D. I've worked with a lot of designers coming into the 3D world for the first time, and they give me a header, and they give me a body, and they give me a footer, and I tell them, you can't, there's no header in VR. Where would you put a header in 3D space? So you need to actually unlearn the things you've learned from the web and start to actually think in the 3D world, just like we do as humans, but we've kind of unlearned it by using this screen all the time. A great example of that is, instead of using a point and click mechanic to press a button, Well, you're in a 3D world. You have a tracked controller. Just press. But that takes a while for people to understand. Engage all the senses. I talked about this before, but it's super important if you're wanting to immerse people and keep that sense of presence. Like I said, right now we have the visual, which everyone focuses on because it's what we see, but just as important is the audio. Just as important is the haptic feedback. And soon, I don't know, maybe next 5 or 10 years, the smell and the touch will be important. Physics, also very important. Nothing breaks immersion faster than someone picking something up, throwing it, and it just doesn't act like the object that it is. Or it doesn't make a sound when it does it. That's the type of thing that breaks people's immersion and makes them remember that they're still in a headset instead of actually in that experience. So you actually have to think about all that. Great example I always tell is a pencil. Or let's take this clicker. If I wanted to make this clicker on a web, I'd show a picture of it. Maybe when I pressed it, it'd make a sound. If I wanted to construct this for VR, well, first I'd have this 3D model made, but I'd also have to think about how heavy is it? Should it, when I throw it, because everyone loves to throw things in VR, it's really fun. When I throw it, how fast does it travel? What sound does it make? When I click it, what sound does it make? Does it give me any visual feedback? These are all the things that we need to consider because we're trying to recreate reality. And recreating a reality is more than just recreating visuals. Prototype early and often. I know the speaker coming on later is a prototyper at Google, so he should be talking a lot about this. But because nobody knows what the best practices are, you have to figure them out. And what better way to figure them out than to prototype? So you're going to want to, through every project we do, we're all constantly trying out ideas. Some work, some don't. Discard the ones that work. Sorry, don't discard the ones that work. That'd be stupid. Discard the things that don't work. Use the ones that do. And share them with the community, too. Learn to love a 3D game engine. Whether you're a developer, a 3D artist, or a designer, 3D game engines offer an important tool to allow you to do things. One of my very good friends is a designer, classically trained designer, has done a lot of really cool stuff in traditional design, and he's recently been talking my ear off about how excited he is about using Unreal to build. He's building his own VR experiences without a developer. They have a cool blueprint system that lets him do that without needing to know any code. It's a nodal-based interface, so he's programming, but he's not writing code. And these 3D tools are built for that because a team requires a lot of people, and you can't just have anymore this throw-it-over-the-wall approach where designers give you a sketch file or a Photoshop file. They need to actually be in there with the developers, moving things around and making things happen. Onboarding is vital. Really quickly, sometimes people will be entering VR. They won't just be the first time in your experience, it'll be the first time they've ever used VR or AR. So you need to account for that and actually teach people how to not just use what you're doing, but how to exist in VR. Embrace your constraints. Like I talked about, there's a whole lot of constraints that we have to deal with right now in VR and AR. Technologies are still forming. There's a lot to be said for understanding what you can't do, understanding your team, and changing your experience accordingly. You're not going to be able to get, everyone's imagination gets huge when oh wow, that's not quiet at all. When they think about VR, but you have to be realistic about what you're trying to do. Photorealism isn't worth it. So a lot of people come to us and they say, we want a photorealistic experience, meaning an experience that looks exactly like it would in the real world, that has perfect lighting, that everything is perfect. The problem with that is, A, it's really expensive to actually create something in a photorealistic way without some various techniques. B, the rendering to do a photorealistic experience. Can you guys still hear me? I know that's like really loud. All right, guy in the back hears me, so we're good. So everyone wants photorealism. The fact is, when you have to deal with optimizations, when you have to deal with the costs of modeling and lighting and animating, it turns out photorealism usually isn't worth it. And what's more, if you're trying to go for something photorealistic and you screw up at all, it breaks immersion. Versus if you try to have a specific style that's not photorealistic, people are actually able to overlook it as long as your experience is good and they don't really actually care. It doesn't actually make your experience better to be photorealistic. So eventually, maybe we'll get to the point where we can do this easily. For now, I would say in very few cases are you actually aiming for that. Focus on creating tools. Let me just do a time check really quick. Particularly being a developer for VR and AR is all about building tools that empower the artists and designers you work with. Because you're working on a team and because it's such a visual medium, a lot of our time is spent building the tools that allow other people to do what they need to do. Optimize early and often. This is really key. A lot of people make the mistake of, oh, we'll optimize it later, we'll optimize it later. They get to a little bit before launch, they're ready to optimize, and they realize something is fundamentally flawed in their architecture, or their art was way too high poly, and things are just going to a crawl, and they end up months late because they have to redo so much stuff. So we suggest always keeping a focus on how smooth is your experience, are you keeping that frames per second high, super important. Make use of existing 3D art and libraries. There's a lot of great stuff out there. Just beware that some of it is not built for VR. VR requires a level of optimization that traditional 3D content hasn't needed. So sometimes you'll get really beautiful art and really great stuff, but you can't use it because it's going to just slow down your experience. But definitely make use of it. There's a lot of great stuff out there. A lot of people put together whole VR experiences out of 3D models that they've downloaded online. Embrace multiple platforms. The great thing about game engines and about everything is it allows you to build out to lots of different technologies. So you can build one experience and optimize it for everything from the Samsung Gear VR to the Oculus Rift to the HTC Vive to everything. In Mira, the project I referenced earlier, we've managed to build it for both the same project built for both AR and VR across mobile and desktop platforms. It's a bit of a pain, but it's pretty cool that it works. So in this time when we have so much fragmentation, make sure you try to build for as much as you can. Think beyond the experience. We're running out of time, so I'll just say really quickly. Right now, VR is about more than what's in the headset. You have to think about the actual act of delivering that experience. How will people consume it? Will it be at a conference like this? If you're using it in a commercial deployment, you have to think about how will all those headsets be deployed and how will they be updated remotely, and how will that training of their staff look? So delivering a really great VR experience is about more than just the 3D content, just the VR itself. It's about actually being able to deliver it. I have a great story about we had 15 HTC Vives set up at a hotel conference room, and we started to set up the day before, and up until 30 minutes before this conference that we had working for months and months, the trackers were all conflicting with each other, so none of the tracking was working for any of our experiences. We got it, but it was very last minute. But it was a great learning that you really have to think through that ahead of time. All right, so really quickly at the end, hopefully some of you are inspired to get started building your own things in VR or AR. It's pretty cool. You can actually go home and do something in it today. So here I have a few tools that you might want to get started with. Unreal and Unity are desktop tools, so they're traditional game engines that are now supporting VR and AR content. They're fantastic. Either one of them. Unreal has a really cool blueprint system if you don't want to code, but if you do want to code, you're writing C++. Unity is a little higher level. It uses C#. It has a bigger community. I use Unity, but they're both really amazing. Over there is a technology called A-Frame. WebVR, which I didn't talk about too much, is pretty cool. You could actually publish things that people can experience in their browser. And A-Frame is one of the pioneering ones. It's actually a lot like, well, part of it is like writing HTML. React VR, if anyone's familiar with React, React VR is another web-based VR tool. There's also some web AR stuff out there. On the modeling side, Autodesk Maya is kind of the standard for 3D modeling. It's heavy. If you're going to become professional, you'll use it. Blender is a free tool that lets you do modeling and various other things recommended. Also, Google has some, well, if you want to model in VR, that's now becoming more and more possible with things like Oculus Medium, which lets you do most of a basic 3D modeling workflow inside of VR. So you're going to want to learn these tools, or at least one of them. Next, try everything. I can't tell you how many times I've met people who want to create VR experiences or AR experiences, and I ask them, well, what have you tried? What do you want to model it after? And they're like, well, I tried tilt brush once, or well, I tried one thing once. No, you have to try everything. These are a few of my favorite experiences for on the one side VR, the other side AR. I recommend checking them all out. Play with everything before you start building. You'll get ideas. You'll learn some of the things that are going to cause problems and how a lot of other smart people have solved them. I'll publish, by the way, afterwards, I'll publish my slides and share them out on Twitter, and I'm sure they could retweet it for me, and you can access them. Start small. A lot of people bite off more than they could chew the first time. Don't do that. Start with a small experience. Like I said, you could actually build something small in a day. There's a lot of great tutorials. Unity has a really great tutorial section. Both Udemy and Udacity have really great VR courses that I could recommend, and probably AR too. But start with something small, build up from that. Join the community. VR and AR is super small community still, super passionate people, a lot of people willing to help. Some of the best people in the world, if you can, there's Slack groups you can join. Reddit has a very good VR channel, subreddits. Lots of good places out there. Everyone's super willing to help. And you're going to need a lot, well, if you're like me, you're going to need a lot of help in the beginning. So join the community. Use existing resources. I've listed a few here. Lots of free 3D models, free sounds. Unity Asset Store, if you're going to go with Unity, has a lot of free libraries and free objects and all sorts of stuff. So make sure to use those. Don't try to build everything from scratch. And finally, just get started. Build something cool and show it to your friends. Even if it's just a Google Cardboard app, if you don't have any headset, or a ARKit app, or an AR Core app, if you want to do something on your phone. It's pretty quick to get something up, and you could build up from there, but everything has to start somewhere. Just check time. So we're just about done. I think I have a few minutes for questions. Just to wrap up really quick, big things are coming in the next few years in VR and AR. It's a really exciting place to be. The non-gaming space is really taking off, and there's just going to be an explosion of really cool, unique opportunities there. So I highly encourage everyone to check it out, and you could feel free to reach out to me on my email address, or Twitter is there if you have any questions. But it looks like I probably have a few more minutes for questions if anyone has any. Thank you.
So we have a few minutes for questions. I think there's one over here.
Hi.
Hello. So I have a friend of mine that works, he does some serious games, and sometimes they use VR experiences to test, and they mostly work in teaching and how to teach people using VR. And one thing that he found out is that people usually expect a lot more from characters that are inside the VR experience than if they are not in a VR experience. Have you encountered that? Have you any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, it's kind of the whole idea of not breaking people's immersion or presence. And I'd say that 3D characters are definitely one of those big challenges still. I think there's some technologies that are getting better, like Unity is slowly adding more AI capabilities, but also we're getting more and more to being able to, a cool experiment I saw you could capture facial capture using ARKit on the iPhone 10, and then actually use that to animate your characters in VR. So I'd say yes. Characters in particular, if you don't have a big budget, are very challenging. I unfortunately don't have a really good solution on how to fix it other than wait for the technologies to get better, and where you can, and this comes back also to how realistic are those people. If you're trying to do total photorealistic characters, people are going to expect more than more amorphous more animated or less true things that are guiding you through an experience. But yeah, it's getting better. Libraries are getting better. I'm pretty sure we're not too far from anyone being able to just roll characters that feel pretty good.
Questions?
Firstly, thank you for coming and for a presentation. I'm very curious about something that's publicity. In terms of the internet being free, most of it is due to ads and having the possibility to sponsor the message. Do you see any example of this happening? Do you have any idea if this is going to go programmatically? If how does the ad industry is going to relate to this?
Yeah, great question. So the ad industries are definitely, there's a lot of people working on this right now. I know that Google has been doing a lot of experimentation with this. Unity, who has a big ad platform typically used for mobile gaming, has been focusing on this. There's been a lot of experimentation. One of the things that I've seen a lot are pre-rolls. So kind of just like before a movie, you get trailers. Kind of like the loading scenes have either some 3D animation you could deal with, or more likely a lot of video content being displayed there. There's also a company whose name I forget that's doing a lot of tracking, like eye tracking type of stuff, so they can show you where people are looking at any time. So they're exploring using that as a way of informing advertisers about what people are looking at and only kind of crediting them when they're looking at the right things. I think it's still a very unexplored space though. I would say we're far from having like best practices, but definitely look up what, I think it was Google published a bunch of stuff about some of their experiments in advertising and what they're finding there. I expect a lot of product placement too. Kind of like, much like we see in movies, a lot of ability to actually include your products within someone else's 3D experience as 3D models. What's that?
Snapchat actually did something close. It's like you were putting a video, and if he recognized a cup of tea, he would place like a coffee brand related to the tea. And if they saw a bag, even if it's a model of a brand that's publicity, they can put an ad because they are communicating bags. This case. Yeah.
Actually, another really cool one, I know we don't have much time, but I'll say it, is in AR, we're expecting, as head-worn AR becomes more ubiquitous, imagine if we have a shared AR layer, imagine digital ads being placed in real space. Now, I don't know if I want that future, but it's something that a lot of people have talked about. So if I'm a restaurant, maybe I have a giant digital sign sitting on the sidewalk outside of my restaurant saying, come in and get €5 off drinks or something like that. I think that's going to be a pretty big one once we get to that point.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's it for question time. We'll have a showcase area where they will be able to reach you if any one of you guys has any more questions. Let's give a big round of applause for Knauss.
Thank you, everyone.